A bright and musically gifted college student vanished in 1973, just days before he was scheduled to testify in an armed robbery case involving a man who had repeatedly threatened him. Known for his charisma and leadership as a drum major, he had confided in family that he was terrified to take the stand. After leaving behind all of his belongings, including his car and wallet, he was never seen again. Witnesses reported seeing two men pounding on his apartment door the day he disappeared, and investigators believe he may have opened the door out of fear and left with them. Though the original suspect later served time for the robbery, no one was ever charged in the disappearance. Loved ones and investigators still believe foul play was involved and continue to search for answers. Welcome to Without a Trace. I'm your host, Jolynn. Every file holds a mystery. Every story deserves to be heard. This is Henry's story. Henry Baltimore was the second of 8 children and the oldest son born to Doris and Henry Baltimore Sr. He was born on January 16, 1952. From birth, Henry became inseparable with his older sister, Laurel. Henry had a very outgoing personality and was always smiling and happy. He was a bright light to every room he walked into, and his easygoing personality made people naturally gravitate to him. As a child, Henry was a Cub Scout and delivered papers for the Jackson Citizen Patriot. Henry was considered quite musically talented. He played in the band at Parkside High School in Jackson, Michigan until he graduated in 1970. He progressed to becoming the first African-American drum major for the Michigan State University's 215-piece marching band. Henry had come up with a new style of drum major, and the community loved it. Every time there was a game or a parade, the community eagerly waited to see what Henry came up with. Henry was a junior at Michigan State University, studying social science and music. He had dreams of becoming a social worker. Henry was a bright student and was an honor student. On top of maintaining good grades and being the school's drum major, Henry also had a job at the university's library. In junior high, Henry met his best friend, George Heath. Henry and George remained best friends throughout their adulthood, attending Michigan State University together and becoming roommates in their off-campus apartment. On March 3, 1973, Henry was alone in the apartment when he was robbed at gunpoint. 2 men had restrained him, tied him to his bed, and beat him with a pistol. The men stole a watch, his golf bag, clothing, and $110 in cash. Henry became very quiet after the attack, and his friends and family believe he was living in fear. Henry didn't want to file a police report, stating he was frightened, but after the urging of his father, he filed the report 10 days later, on March 13th. While making the report, Henry told police he had been threatened and feared for his life. He named Roy as a suspect and further confirmed his identity by picking him out of a lineup. According to Henry's best friend and roommate, George, Roy Davis had previously come over to their apartment to hang out. The atmosphere was odd while Roy visited, as he kind of just sat around and didn't say much. Within a month, Roy was arrested and charged with armed robbery. While in custody, Roy was interviewed by police. He said he met Henry a couple of weeks prior to the armed robbery. He stated he was actually in the parking lot while 2 other men, who he wouldn't name, robbed Henry. Interestingly, Roy refused a polygraph test. Roy was given bond and was released. Following his release, Roy stopped by Henry's apartment several times, making threats to scare Henry into dropping the charges. Before the first arraignment hearing, Roy even came by Henry's apartment and sat with him for hours to make sure Henry didn't go to court to testify against him. Henry agreed to drop the charges. 2 days after the first hearing, Henry approached the police and asked them to drop the case. The police wouldn't do that, though, and Henry was issued a $50 fine for failing to show up. The police also issued a bench warrant for his arrest, forcing him to testify. The hearing was rescheduled for May 24, 1973. Roy escalated things further and returned the stolen goods to Henry in return for a promise that he would not testify at the hearing, allowing the case against Roy to be dismissed. It was evident to Henry's family and friends that the case was weighing on him. The weekend before Memorial Day, Henry traveled home with his sister Laurel, telling his roommates that he needed to get away from his apartment. During the drive, Henry confessed to his sister that he was terrified to testify. Roy's arraignment hearing was set for June 1st, 1973, but Henry would vanish before he could testify again. At the time, Henry was living in off-campus housing with 3 roommates. On May 30th, Henry's sister Laurel, who was also a student at Michigan State University, stopped by his apartment to pick up a paper. She had previously agreed to type up his final paper for him, but Henry wasn't home, and his roommates claimed he had visited the library and never came back. Laurel didn't hear from him, even after the paper's due date passed, and she became concerned. She phoned his apartment and learned his roommates shared her concerns. That evening, Henry didn't show up for dinner, despite the roommates always sharing dinner together. Laurel and Henry Sr. went to the apartment to check things out. Nothing was out of the ordinary. All of Henry's belongings were there, including his car, keys, wallet, and clothing. Henry was the only thing missing. The next morning, Henry's family and friends went to the police station to try to report him missing, but the police wouldn't take them seriously. The first thought the police had was that Henry fled to avoid testifying, so they told his loved ones to wait 24 hours to see if he resurfaced. Henry's family knew he wouldn't flee. Plus, Henry left all of his belongings behind, including his car and money, so the theory that he fled didn't make any sense. They continued to advocate for Henry until the police took his disappearance seriously. Once the police began to investigate Henry's disappearance, they described his disappearance as suspicious and quickly suspected foul play was involved. 2 other residents of the apartment complex came home and found a green car parked in their assigned parking spot. They witnessed 2 males pounding on Henry's door. As they walked by, the males even asked them if they knew where Henry was. Henry and his roommates had class that day, so the apartment was thought to be empty. However, investigators suspect that Henry had been home alone on the day he went missing. As the men pounded on his front door, Henry was terrified to open the door. Given his apartment showed no signs of forced entry, it is believed that he ended up opening the door and getting in the car with the men. By August, investigators had completely run out of clues. Roy had an alibi from his mother at the time Henry vanished, and he was never arrested for Henry's disappearance. Several months later, Roy pleaded guilty to the original armed robbery charge and was sentenced to 6 months in the county jail. The police's theory that Henry dropped out of sight to avoid testifying against Roy was becoming less and less likely. In 2004, Henry's case was reopened. Time has been the biggest enemy in this case. Investigators re-interviewed the neighbors, but they didn't remember the case at all. The original investigation was extremely vague, making it difficult for investigators today to follow up on leads. Henry's family provided DNA samples, which allowed investigators to create a potential DNA profile for Henry to be available in the CODIS system. Investigators believe Henry was murdered, and his remains are somewhere between East Lansing, Michigan, and Flint, Michigan, where Roy lived at the time. In the event that remains are found, Henry's potential DNA profile can be compared to the remains to assist in identification. Henry's family has not given up hope that they will find answers. Along with investigators, they believe someone knows something that would help solve the case. There is a reward available for information that helps investigators find Henry. Thank you for listening to Without a Trace. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into Henry's disappearance. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and follow Without a Trace on social media, and join me next week as I dive into another case.